this is a really important story to tell, and to understand this is particularly now, because, as I was saying before, race is central to our story. Race, race, race. And a lot of people don't like that. And a lot of people don't want to hear about it.
Welcome to the latest episode of The End Game, where we discuss race and sports. For episode 34, we have a historical story about college football integration, a story you won't read in ESPN, The Athletic, The New York Times, all those major news outlets, Sports Illustrated. They've been duped. They think Bear Bryant started integration in 1970. Well, the man you're about to hear from, Bill Tate at Wake Forest, was 6 years ahead of him. And one of his recruits, who actually ended up riding the Underground Railroad to Michigan State, Jack Pitts, is also with us. So let me give you a little background first on Bill, and then we'll move on. Bill was an assistant coach at Illinois when Wake Forest decided in 1964 it was time to integrate. And they hired Bill Tate, and the first thing he did was recruit 3 black players for that 1964 class. They were the first Southern school from a major conference to recruit black players out of high school. Now you're going to hear that and you're going to say, oh, wait a minute. I watched HBO. Darrell Hill at Maryland was the first black player in the ACC. That is true. But he was a senior transfer from Navy. He was a polished product. Wake Forest was the first one to recruit black players out of high school and to remain committed to them into 65 and 66, 67, and ongoing recruiting classes, whereas Maryland did not resume recruiting black players until later in the decade. So, Bill Tate, 93 years old, looking great, doing great, and ready to fill us in with a little history here. Bill, talk about those first interviews with Wake Forest President Harold Tribble, and you were a 32-year-old assistant coach at Illinois, and he not only talks to you about being the new head coach at Wake Forest, but making history integrating the program.
Was I naive? I was. I must comply. I just, I guess, probably fortunate in Wake electing me because they had a number of candidates, and so I felt very blessed that they selected me. We were concerned. Wake had some bad seasons. I think I mentioned this, that they had lost 20 games in a row when we got there. So it was kind of a depressed time for Wake Forest. So we had, and I must confess, I stole this offense. When I was at Illinois, we played University of Washington. So moving on, when I was at Wake Forest and having a coaches meeting, that was when Dr. Tribble initiated the phone call to me and asked me to come over for a meeting. I did not know what the meeting was about, but when I got there, President Tribble asked me about what I thought about recruiting athletes of color. And I said, I'm all for it. I'm ready to do it. I said, but I'm concerned about the academics, about enrolling the students in. And of course, amusingly enough, Dr. Dribble said, Coach, you recruit them and I'll get them in. So that's the way it all started. And of course, that was a result of Bob Grant, who became an outstanding player. And Butch Henry was also a good athlete, not as good as Jack Pitts, but he was a good athlete, and he played a different position. He played a wideout for us, and of course Butch Smith. So I'm so thrilled, Tom, that you put this together and allow us to discuss this issue, because I was just thrilled by it. And then of course we had some problems, not only within the school with certain professors. They were not all on board with integration. Then from there on, we were on to the recruiting trail. And of course, that raises the question of the man that's on here with me, that I'm so thrilled to see him. I mean, I can't tell you what this means to me, Jack, but
Bill,
I had heard about you, and I can't tell you how I heard about you, but the only thing I knew is that you ran the 100 in 10 seconds, and you threw and passed for 60 touchdowns, and you could throw right or left-handed. Am I accurate?
Yeah. Let me interrupt right here, Jack. So Bill recruited 3 black players in 64, born 65, and then he started recruiting in 66 with other black players. Remind our audience, especially the younger ones, Jack, what the climate was like in the South and how brave it was for Wake Forest to recruit black players in the mid 1960s. The KKK was still around.
yeah. And Bill, Coach, it's just a pleasure to see you. I had talked to Jimmy Ray, and he talked about meeting you, and you were still talking about me. But in 1966, we were still playing. I only played against black schools. I never played against any white players. So it was very segregated. The environment was very heated, and so there was a concern on my part that going to Wake Forest as a quarterback, because at that time, the majority didn't think that a black guy could play quarterback. So I thank Coach Tate for believing that I was good enough to be a college quarterback, even though I was black. I gotta say this though, that was from my side. I never thought about all the pressure that Coach Tate had to be feeling recruiting a black guy like me. I know how it was in Georgia. They never called me. And here's a guy who not only called me, he came to my house and sat on the couch and talked to my mom about me going to Wake Forest. There's some other things, and I don't know if it's appropriate to talk about them now. But again, one of the biggest ones was we walked into the SCLC office in Atlanta, and Coach Tate said to Ralph Abernathy, I want to see Dr. King, and I want him to meet Jack Pitts, because we want Jack Pitts to be the first Negro quarterback in the ACC. And I'm like floored. I've never met Dr. King. I've only heard about him. And here I am standing in the midst of his office with a white football coach.
That gives me chills.
Even now,
it
gives me chills.
I tell you one thing. I said, I'm going to do everything I can, because I want this guy to be my man, because you were just made for our offense, because we use the option offense, and recruiting you would have just been a masterpiece for our program, and you would have been a trailblazer. We ended up having Freddie Summers later, who was a black quarterback, and Freddie was good. But in all honesty, he wasn't as good as you. You had so
Bill,
much talent.
let's finish that story in Martin Luther King's office. Jack, what? So you show up, and then what happens? Who comes walking?
So Ralph Abernathy says to Coach Tate, "Can I help you?" And Coach Tate said, "I want to see Dr. King, and I want to introduce him to Jack Pitts, who we want to be the first Negro quarterback in the ACC." So Abernathy goes back and he gets Dr. King, and he comes out of the office, introduces himself, shakes hands, and he looks at me and he shakes my hand and he says, "Son, I wish you the best of luck, but I don't know nothing about football." But I met Dr. King. I mean, can you imagine? I'm a 19-year-old. I see him in the news, on the television, and people all around him. And here I am standing in front of him, shaking his hand, all because of Coach Tate.
Yeah.
Nobody else did that. Nobody else did that.
And Jack and Bill, that puts you in the same category as Southern Methodist coach Hayden Fry and the great Jerry Levias, College Football Hall of Famer, the first black player in the Southwest Conference. Martin Luther King spoke at SMU in the spring of '66, and Hayden Fry and the president arranged for King to meet with Jerry Levias. And Jerry Levias said King told him to remain humble. Remain humble. And what he meant by that, and Jerry Levias practiced it throughout his career, and to control your temper. When Jerry Levias had to endure cheap shots on the field and abuse from fans, he stayed focused on the game. So, Martin
He's a great
Luther King
athlete.
had no much about football, but he knew a lot about life.
Yeah, Jerry Levias was a great athlete, no doubt about it. And so it following up on Jack, as I mentioned earlier, I was going a four-court press, if you want to use a basketball term, trying to get Jack and having Willie Mays call Jack, and of course everybody else that we came in contact. Even our players were on the team. They were very gracious. Brian Piccolo, who was an outstanding player from Florida, he helped us in the recruiting. And John Makovic, who I don't know if you know the name John Makovic, but John was the head coach at Wake Forest, and he was the head coach at Kansas City Chiefs. And I think he was a head coach someplace else. I don't know, Texas, University of Texas. He was a head coach there. But we had as much help as we can get, but it was too strong of a, and I understand Jack's feeling. It was too strong of a trend, I would say, to go to a northern school like Michigan State. I understand that, and the only thing I wish I'd have done is maybe called Illinois and have them recruit him also. If I was going to lose him, I might lose him to my alma mater.
But Coach,
I'll have you comment on that some more, Jack, but I want to put up on the screen for our viewers so they understand this. Here's a picture of the 1970 Alabama team, all white, next to Michigan State's 1966 national championship team, where Duffy Doherty had 20 black players, 2 black team captains, and then Jimmy Ray is the South's first black quarterback to win a national title, and 11 black starters. Can somebody tell me why the national media thinks Bear Bryant launched integration in 1970? And then here's another set of photos to compare. The 1967 USC team that won the national title. USC, people don't understand this. Back in those days, John McKay was following the unwritten quota of limiting black players to about a half dozen or so. And even in populous Los Angeles and diverse Los Angeles, he only had 7 black players on that 67 team. And now here, I didn't find a 1967 photo Bill, from one of your teams, but I have a 1970 Wake Forest team with Cal Stoll, a Duffy Doherty assistant as the head coach. He
Right.
succeeded. So some of these black players you recruited, some of them Cal Stoll recruited. This is a 1970 Wake Forest team. Compare that to the 1970 Alabama team. Why does Bear Bryant get credit for leading college football integration? Jack, comment on Wake Forest leadership from that standpoint.
Well, I think there's one thing. It was Bear Bryant, and Bear Bryant had been winning football games at Alabama for some time. And I think the media locked in on that. I never got a call from a Southeastern Conference school. And Georgia Tech had said that they were going to scour the country to find the best athletes that they could, north, south, east, and west. And so there was a letter written to the Department of HUD because the Southeast Conference was getting $2 billion from HUD to integrate. And the guy from the ACLU wrote a letter to HUD and said, they ain't doing nothing. We need to put a check on it. Georgia Tech is talking about scouring the country. They got a kid 10 minutes away who Duffy Jordan called the best high school quarterback prospect he'd ever seen on film. He ain't got a call. So Wake Forest at that time, was a major player in recruiting myself, and I'm sure some of the other black players that ended up going to Wake Forest. I didn't know all of the things that were happening until maybe 20 years later when my high school coach and my principal said that not only was I going to go to Wake Forest, but R.J. Reynolds had looked at me in my academic career. I was a valedictorian of my class. They said they were going to put me in their management program as soon as I graduated from Wake Forest. Coach Tate did everything possible, and it just didn't work out.
Yeah,
That was the Jack.
So in that,
Jack's bringing up a good point, Tom, about the academics, and I'd failed to mention that because Jack academically qualified for Wake Forest. Now, some people might say, well, that's not so much. But back then, to qualify for Wake Forest, you had to be a good student. You just couldn't be a run-of-the-mill student. And Jack qualified academically. And I think that says a ton of things about him as an individual. And I want the audience to know that.
Okay, so at 64, Bill Tate convinces Bob Grant from Jacksonville, North Carolina, and Butch Henry from Greensboro, North Carolina, and William Butch Smith, who also comes. So 3 black players in that 1964 recruiting class. You lined up Butch Henry and Butch Smith as roommates, and that left Bob Grant without a roommate. Bill, what'd you do?
Well, fortunately, as I said earlier, our players were very, what shall I say, full acceptance to the integration idea. And of course, Brian was no less one of those. Brian.
Coach, let me interject here. Brian Piccolo, who was famous for rooming with Gale Sayers years later with the Chicago Bears, you matched him up with Bob Grant.
Correct. Brian Piccolo was a senior. He was from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And Brian was totally accepted with the idea of Bob rooming with him. And of course, that was the beginning. Now, back then, freshmen were not eligible. And so Bob was on the freshman team. And of course, Brian was a senior. So it was a good marriage as far as I was concerned, because Brian was very, very tolerant. I think he probably helped Bob acclimate himself to Wake Forest. And as a result, we had a good marriage with the two of them. And I think they taught each other something. Brian was also a great player for us. He led the nation in scoring and rushing that year. Can you imagine if we'd had someone like Jack Pitts as our quarterback? Brian Bigelow was our fullback, there was nobody could have played with us. They wouldn't want to play with us. And that's how much I thought of Jack Pitts. And of course, Brian was an exceptional young man. And I've told you this story that they had lost 20 games in a row, and we went up and played Virginia and won that game. Can you imagine, after losing 20 games in a row, you win your first game? And coming back on the bus from Charlottesville, Brian led the whole team in a song fest. And I still get chills thinking about that. But that was the leadership that we had in Brian. And I'm just sorry that I didn't have the chance to coach Jack Pitts. Probably, but I'm so happy for him. I am. I can't tell you how elated I am that Jack did things that we should make at Michigan State. And Duffy was fortunate to. Now I do recall, Jack, fill me in, because when you went to Michigan State, there was another quarterback there at Michigan State, and I can't remember his name, but he was a good one. Can you tell us who that was?
Jimmy Ray.
Jimmy Ray, that's it. And he was a good one, wasn't he?
Coach, I got to tell you, Jimmy Ray probably single-handedly, after a basketball game on one of my recruiting trips to Michigan State, he came over to me, and I told Tom this. You know, when I'm playing with George Webster, Bubba Smith, Gene Washington, Clinton Jones, Drake Garrett, Jimmy Ray, and I'm saying these guys are all-American football players, but they can play the hell out of some basketball. And after we finished, Jimmy came over to me and he said, "Man, you need to be here with us."
And that's something.
Yeah,
pretty tough to recruit against that, Bill. The
Pretty
Spartans,
hard
they
to
were
compete
coming,
with that, isn't it?
they were coming off their unbeaten Big Ten title as well as the national championship from UPI. Jack, tell us about. Well, first of all, we didn't finish the Willie Mays story. Talk about getting your phone call from Willie Mays
well,
and the advice he gave you.
I am, again, you know, I met with Coach Tate, I met Dr. Martin Luther King, and I get a call from Willie Mays. I mean, can you, I'm a 19-year-old kid, you know, and here, these are, you know, mega stars in society. And I meet Dr. King and I get a call at home from Willie Mays. And he says, "Son, I hear Wake Forest is recruiting you. And I just want to tell you, you have the opportunity to make a huge difference in this world." You know, and I was floored. So Coach Tate, you know, you got me places where I never thought I would get. You know,
It's kind of interesting. The way that came about, Jack, is that when I was at Illinois, we had a football player who also played baseball. His name was Tom Haller, and he was a catcher on that San Francisco Giant baseball team.
Okay.
That was my contact, because obviously I didn't know Willie Mays. But when I talked to Tom, I said, "Would you have Willie call me? Because I've got a great prospect in Georgia I'd like for him to call." And you know what, Jack? He called me that very day.
Yeah.
Willie Mays called me that very day, and I gave him the information. And as a result of that, he called you. And I'll never forget, it told me volumes about Willie Mays too, the kind of character he was. And Willie Mays is still living, I believe, isn't he?
Yeah, he passed away recently, very recently.
Yeah.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah.
I didn't.
Yeah. Hey, Jack, so Willie Mays, Martin Luther King, but the voice that Jack listened to was Jimmy Ray.
Well, you know, you got to remember, Jimmy Ray was a starting quarterback.
Yeah, please emphasize that. Please emphasize that to our younger audience that doesn't understand what a groundbreaker he was.
Yeah. Jimmy Ray was a starting quarterback, and my mom and I were sitting in January of 1966 watching the Rose Bowl. And Jimmy Ray is playing his butt off, and they lose to, I think, UCLA 14-12 because Bob Apisa got stopped on the goal line.
That's correct.
But the story behind that is that I talked to Jimmy about this. Duffy told Jimmy, "You got to pitch it." Jimmy said when he went to the end, there was a highway into the end zone. But Duffy told him, "You got to pitch it to Bob," and he did. I mean, I have to say that that's the way we were coached coming up.
Yeah.
We did what the coach told us to do. So that's how I got to be, a defensive back at Michigan State because Duffy said, "You'll double your chances of making the travel squad." Well, I'm going to make the travel squad because I'm the best punter. I'm the best punter on the team. And everybody knew it, but the way I was raised and the way I was coached, you did what the coach told you to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about your freshman year. You got up there and you were playing quarterback for the freshman team. But tell us a story about how Duffy had you demonstrate your ambidextrous passing ability.
Well, it's really funny because when I went, I beat out 6 quarterbacks on the freshman team. And, we were going down to play Indiana. And Ed Rutherford, the freshman coach, had not decided who was going to be the starter. So in the middle of the ride down to Indiana, he pulls me in the back and he said, "Jack, come in the back. I want to talk to you." He said, "Jack," he says, "John Lindquist, who was the guy I was competing against, has 25, 30 people in his family and friends coming to the game." He said, "But there's no way I can't start you." He said, "You're my best quarterback." So I play against Indiana. We beat Indiana, and then the freshman team, the Sophomores, win the Big Ten. The second game was against Notre Dame. I played so well, the paper titled me Triple Threat Pitts. So now I go up to the varsity that fall. They put all of the quarterbacks I beat out on the freshman team back in front of me. Because the climate that time in East Lansing was, the boosters told Duffy, "You can't have 2." And they were talking about Jimmy Ray and myself. So when I got to beat Jimmy's backup, I'm sitting on the bench. I'm not going to beat Jimmy out. I know that, okay? But I'm still the best punter, okay? So I'm going to make the traveling squad. But Duffy had Hank Buller, who helped recruit me, to come over and tell me, "We want you to learn how to play defense." So the deal was I was supposed to spend 50% of my time on defense and 50% of my time on offense. Well, when I got to the defense, Hank Buller said, "Why don't you just stay over here?" Now they only have one black quarterback to deal with, and that's Jimmy Ray, And so I'm supposed to be the nickel back on defense. So I go in on passing downs. And the first game against Houston, our All-American safety goes down to a knee injury. They take the left cornerback and move him to safety. And they say, "Pitts, you're starting at left corner." And so that's how I got to be a defensive back, and most people don't understand that. It wasn't a choice. It was, we want you to learn how to play defense, and I broke my neck in the third game.
Yeah, broke your neck and that ended your career.
Ended my career.
Yeah. But as you said, you were also a good punter. You were.
Well, when I got hurt, I was first in the Big Ten at 42 point something per yard kicking and second in the country. And that was a decision after I broke my neck, is whether or not I could be a punter.
Jack, what was your size in college?
I was 6 feet and I weighed about 180.
Okay.
I could run a 4.3 and I could throw left or right handed and I punted with my left foot.
Yeah. Tell us a story about Duffy having you demonstrate your passing ability.
Well, when I came up to the varsity, they had press day.
Your freshman year, right?
This is my, freshman year. And he tells the press, about 120, 25 press people there. He said, I got something to show you guys. And he said, Jack Pitts, come out here. And so he said, Jack, and he tells the press, y'all watch this now. Jack, I want you to roll out to your right and throw a 30, 40 yard down and out. So I roll out to my right, zip. He said, now you watch this. He said, Jack, I want you to roll out to your left and throw with your left hand a 30, 40 yard down and out. And I went up and zip with my left hand. And the audience, woo. That was my introduction to the press.
I can believe
Yeah.
that.
And I remember another quarterback in that class with you, Jack, was a guy named Steve Garvey.
Steve Garvey. Yep.
Who
Steve
was also,
Garvey.
and when I remember when I interviewed him for my book, Ray of Light, he said he got up there and he looked around at all the quarterback talent, and it included guys that were ambidextrous. Steve ended up playing defensive back also.
Yeah.
But Jack or Bill, let me talk about bringing Freddie Summers to Wake Forest as the first Black quarterback in the South. Another story you don't hear from Sports Illustrated, ESPN. Wake Forest was breaking ground. Talk about bringing Freddie Summers to you, and he was a starter in 67 and 68. First Black starting quarterback in the South. And then later, Jack, you're going to have to comment on missing out on that place in history.
Yeah.
We had heard,
Bill.
we had heard about Freddie. I don't know where, but I happen to have a coach on my staff who was from Nebraska, and Freddie was from Massachusetts, but some way he matriculated down to North Platte Junior College in Platte, Nebraska. And I sent Dick out to recruit Freddie Summers to Wake Forest. And Freddie he bought into our program, but we used the option series, and as a result, we brought Freddie in, and Freddie played for us. An exceptional quarterback. He wasn't probably not quite as good as Jack might have been for us, but he was a good one. And unfortunately, Jack, we lost his first year. We went, I think it was 5-3 or 6-3, and would you believe we lost 5 games by a total of 9 points?
Wow.
That was, but our team was good. We were a good team, and even the coaches we beat said you are snake bitten. We were, but anyway, that's the rest of the story about Freddie. He was a good man too.
Yeah.
Jack, what about your place in history?
Well, Tom and Bill, I've been very fortunate. After I couldn't play football anymore, I started playing basketball. I played basketball with a team that didn't lose a game in 6 years. And then I started playing golf. And I became very good at golf and, in fact, turned pro back in 1980. So I missed being the quarterback who integrated the ACC. But, having now being reunited with Coach Tate, I reflect even deeply how I missed that opportunity. I enjoyed my time at Michigan State. There were some great guys there, and taught me a lot about life, so I'm fortunate to have that side. I sometimes wonder what my life would have been like if I had gone to Wake Forest and been that guy, Bill Tate thought I could be.
You were blessed, Jack.
Yep.
Yeah, and then Jack, you also told me about how Dr. Green launched your professional career as you graduated.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well,
Dr. Green was the one who brought Martin Luther King to Michigan State in 1965 to speak.
Yeah. Doc, I worked for Dr. Green after I finished my MBA. And I was working in the College of Engineering as a freshman advisor. And Doc, had a budget officer who was leaving the college, and they both said that I would be a perfect replacement. And so I went to work as a budget officer in the College of Urban Development back in 1972, 74, somewhere in there. And before I left, I was assistant dean. And so I got a chance to see how the university worked. I'm also, I finished all my coursework for a PhD, but people were calling me Dr. Pitts anyway. So I said, why go through a dissertation when they already got the name? So, but again, I am just thrilled to be able to sit here and have a conversation with Coach Tate. He was a wonderful man and a wonderful recruiter. It just didn't work out. That's it.
Okay, I want to back up one more point, and this is especially for our younger audience. Well, heck, for the national audience, for national sports writers who think Bear Bryant led college integration. And that's the Shug Jordan story at Auburn. In 1966, Wake Forest travels to Auburn. Now, college football games were scheduled 5 to 10 years in advance. So when Wake Forest and Auburn signed their deal, they were two white schools. But by the time Wake Forest shows up in 1966, they've got black players on their roster. And Wake Forest cannot find a hotel to take the team. And Shug Jordan, the Auburn coach, intervened and found a hotel for you guys. That's the story, right, Bill?
That's exactly right. I've got to thank Shug Jordan. There's probably many coaches had ideas like I had, but they were limited to the voice of the South, and the voice of the South was, we're not for integration right now. And Shug Jordan knew that, and of course he was ready to help any way he could. And I would venture to say, and I'm only guessing, but I would guess if the university authorized him to recruit black colors or black kids, he would have done so. Because
Yeah.
it's very favorable to me and to our kids. He talked to them, and he blessed us with giving the hotel. He did everything. He knew we couldn't get to the theaters. He knew that, so he didn't even try. We couldn't find a restaurant. We did cater our own food. There wasn't any entertainment, so we took our own movies. But Shug was very, very kind with his time while we were there. And I must say, I did not sense any negative fans. There may have been, but I didn't detect them. I was so involved in the game that there may have been some boos, but I did not detect any.
Yeah.
And that was a good thing. And
Well,
maybe they thought they were going to beat us anyway. They didn't have to pour it on. I don't know.
Well, the other point about Shug Jordan is he recruited James Owens out of Fairfield, Alabama in 1969, his first black player. That was 1 year before Bear Bryant.
Yeah.
The excuse always made for Bear Bryant waiting till 1970 is George Wallace wouldn't let him recruit black players. Well, first of all, George Wallace wasn't even in office from 1907 to 71. And second of all, Duke Jordan recruited James Owens, and nobody fired James Owens. But the national media continues to stick by this. Bear Bryant launched integration in 1970 with the USC game. And even there's an Alabama writer named Keith Donovan who on the HBO show about Bear Bryant made up a story about how Bear Bryant couldn't find a integrated team to come to the South. And he cited Boston College. Well, here's Shug Jordan doing all that stuff already beforehand. So the Bear Bryant myths are, it's a sad story that he deserves no credit. and he gets all of it from a media that has not done its homework. So let's wrap up here. First of all, Bill, I want you to put all modesty aside and comment on what courage it took for Wake Forest to integrate in 1964 and how they deserve more credit than they get.
Well, I think first of all, it helps to be young and naive. And I was probably young and naive, not afraid, fearless, young and naive probably would be the best way to put it, and enthused about the sport itself, enthused about the winning, enthused about the small school, Wake Forest. What we did at Wake Forest probably would have been difficult at a larger institution because of the many different voices being heard at that time and probably a lot of anti voices. But we did, I think also there's a background here that I haven't shared with you. As you well know, Wake Forest was backed a great deal by the Reynolds Tobacco Company and the Reynolds Tobacco Foundation. And because they gave quite a bit of funds to Wake Forest, I'm satisfied now. No one's told me this, but I would guess that I'm right. And I feel that probably somebody in the Reynolds Tobacco Foundation suggested to Dr. Tribble that we begin integration with our athletes. But that's just my feeling. And as a result, Dr. Tribble, who was fearless, and he was all for it, because I could tell from my conversations with him. But I'm sure that he had some prompting from the Reynolds Foundation, and as a result, Dr. Tribble, who was he was an old Baptist preacher, and he was a character, and he was not afraid of anything, and he went right after it. And when I brought the Bob and Butch in and Butch Smith, I took him right to his office, and he wanted to meet them right away. And you couldn't have done that at the University of Illinois, where you had 25,000 students. You couldn't have done that, but we had 3,500 students, and so it's a small school. The president, he is in contact with the students. And so when we brought him in, he wanted to meet them. And so I took them up to meet Dr. Tribble. And he helped me recruit the boys as much as anybody, because we did not have an athletic director at that time. Gene Hooks had not been hired. He was not hired until after I had come on board at the school. So it helped to have someone like Dr. Tribble acting on behalf of the school and the athletic department. So it was a good story and something I'll never forget. But I love to be around. I love to be around people who are strong, but are also smart and are also unselfish. I love to be around people that way, that talk about you and we, and not so much about I.
Well, and so in 1964, Wake Forest desegregates. That same year, Houston desegregates with Warren McVeigh, Houston by Bill Yeoman, a Duffy Daugherty assistant coach before he went to Houston. In 1965, Southern Methodist desegregates with Jerry LaVias. 1966, Kentucky recruits its first black players. Tennessee in 1967. So the dominoes were tumbling, but the dominoes were all set up to tumble by Duffy Daugherty setting the standard with his fully integrated teams. Bill, tell us about Duffy's courage too.
He was a great guy. He
Yeah.
really was.
He really was.
A real good individual.
Yeah.
The coaching
Okay.
performance Well, he had some good coaches that that coached for him too, like Bob Devaney,
Yeah.
And Bill Yeoman, and what was the guy?
Dan Devine,
What was the coach's name that went to Notre Dame?
Dan Devine.
Dan
Dan
Devine.
Devine went to Arizona State, Missouri, and Notre Dame. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And
Well, okay. Well, let's wrap up here. But Jack, I want you to kind of make the final comments here. I want to point out, Jack, that you didn't make history as the first black quarterback in the South, starting quarterback, but you are among a very few black players in the South who were the first ones to have the option to remain in the South or go north. Prior to you, a black kid, that was their only option, was to hope somebody like Duffy Daugherty would recruit them and bring them north. So you do have a special place in history, although the national media doesn't understand it. One thing that I always heard from the black athletes that went up to Michigan State that were from the South is when they weighed their recruiting trip to Michigan State versus other integrated programs, they felt that the black players at Michigan State were more comfortable with their social environment. And that was the reason they wanted to go there. So, Jack, I want you to comment about the courage of Bill Tate, the courage of Duffy Daugherty, and despite the end of your career at Michigan State with a broken neck, how it all turned out great for you.
Well, first of all, Coach Tate, as a 19-year-old, I knew what the chances and the obstacles were for a black quarterback to play in a major white institution. What I didn't realize at the time is the courage it took for a person like you to go after a person like me to play at a school like Wake Forest. I have to imagine that, those who didn't want integration at the time had to be, belligerent, threatening and other kinds of things. I found out from a white kid who went to the University of Georgia, who played with us in my neighborhood, who was asked to come out for football because he was could be a good tight end. And he said, well, I have this friend in Decatur, and all these schools are after him. Why aren't you guys recruiting him? And I can't think of who the head coach was at the time, but he said, look, the board of trustees told us we could not recruit Negroes. They said, all the coaches, you cannot recruit Negroes. So for Coach Tate to be doing that in that environment is remarkable. My time at Michigan State, I enjoyed. I grew academically. I grew athletically because I started playing other sports. And I became quite successful at those other sports. So I had a great time at MSU, and I don't look negatively on that experience. I'm blessed. I'm blessed. Coach Tate, I just went last October into the Georgia High School Football Hall of Fame. And I was sitting there with guys who had gone to Georgia Tech and Georgia, and they didn't know my story. They didn't know that a guy like me, who was going into the Hall of Fame like them, was not even recruited by Georgia Tech or Georgia. They didn't know that, and so I'm kind of, glad that this comes out. I'm kind of glad that a guy like Coach Tate is being recognized for taking those steps forward at a time when it had to be pretty dangerous, not just for him, but for me too.
Right. All right. Thanks, Jack. Yeah. So that's our episode. Please share it with as many friends as you can, because as I always say, when I do get a chance to talk at schools or whatever, segregation is recent history, not ancient.
Yep.
And this was a great lesson for our younger audience to learn about what it took to overcome to get to the point we are now. Thanks for watching.